Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining today's webinar from Real Story Group. This is always probably our most exciting webinar of the year as we unveil the latest version of our MarTech Stack vendor map. And Tony Byrne, our founder and CEO, is going to walk through some of the key takeaways and themes as we put the map together this year. And we're so grateful to have so many of you join us on today's call. We know you're all very busy, so to take 30 minutes of your time to join us, we really do appreciate it. As we get started, we just want to mention that we'll have a couple minutes at the end for questions. So if you have any questions, feedback, or anecdotes that you'd like to share, please enter that into the questions tab and then go to webinar control panel. A recording from this presentation will be available for the next couple of days, and for all of you attending here, you'll be able to get a copy of the slides as well. So keep an eye out for that. And also just wanted to talk to you a little bit about Real Story Group. I do see a number of new names that have joined us for the presentation today. So welcome. And you know, what's interesting about our firm, we've been at this for over 22 years now. And Tony likes to tell the story of how he essentially started Real Story Group almost out of frustration because what he was reading at that time in the analyst reports wasn't matching his experience when implementing and integrating web content management systems. And so we started with just web content management, and we've expanded into other marketing technology areas as well. But what we've always stayed true to and is fundamental to our business model is the fact that for all the vendors that we cover and all the different marketplaces that Tony's going to talk about today, we never work for those vendors in any way. So we don't speak at their conferences, or you know, if they subscribe to our research, we're going to give them any sort of favorable reviews or anything like that. Our job is to tell you the real story about what these vendors do well, but probably more importantly, what they don't do so well and where they might fall short for you. So that's why today you're going to hear a pull no punches approach when it comes to this marketplace and what you can expect to see in the coming months and years. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Tony.
Great, thanks, Scott. This is really one of my favorite times of the year. It's the new map time, and a lot that shows some continuity, but also some discontinuity, and of course a lot of new things to report. So we'll be talking about the map. We'll be talking about issues related to the map going on across MarTech marketplaces, how the map relates to your stack, and then of course it wouldn't be a webinar in the year of our Lord 2023 without talking about AI and ML. And then we'll wrap up by looking at some other key marketplaces and what are some trends that we're seeing there. So here's the new map. A couple of interesting things about it. First, all the same lines that we were covering before are all there, alive and well, if anything bigger and better than they were before. This kind of magenta line here, which we used to be marketing attribution, we've now renamed to marketing analytics and attribution. One of the things that we're seeing, particularly among our MarTech Council members, is a greater interest in marketing analytics as a function within marketing. So none of that is to take away from the importance of enterprise BI and enterprise reporting, but as the march towards the democratization of insights, you know, carries on, we're seeing more and more vendors targeting marketing analytics, particularly on the ad side, but also the owned and operated side. And so we're covering that much more this autumn. And then there's a new line here, kind of the lime covered line, which is AI for marketing. I'll have a lot to say about that. We just added about 10 vendors to that. We'll be updating that later in the year and adding another dozen as well. So you can look forward to that. And I'll have a lot more to say about that in a minute. So let's talk about the big themes here, and the big theme always in MarTech marketplaces and this subway map as a whole is these notions of kind of concentration and fragmentation. So let's start with this idea of fragmentation. So most of these marketplaces have anywhere from, at a minimum, a dozen to, in many cases, 2 dozen or actually 3 dozen viable players. So these are what analyst firms call fragmented marketplaces, and fragmented is analyst speak for there's a heck of a lot of vendors out there in each one of these categories. And it's interesting because traditional analysts tend to frown at that. It feels like to them, it makes the marketplace feel immature. There's too many vendors to cover. There's too much diversity among it. And so there's a temptation to only cover, some of the biggest players. But the reality is that fragmentation is not a bad thing. Fragmentation gives you a lot of choices. Yes, it can be a challenging navigating those choices, and this is obviously where we help you. But it I think reflects actually a healthy market, and in many cases still even mature markets can be highly fragmented. And I think it's a great blessing to us all in the marketing technology world that we do have these choices. And that allows for some experimentation, but also for getting not the best tool, but the best fit tool for you. But I guess the converse of fragmentation is there still is the city center. There's always been a city center since we first created this map in 2008, where you have big players. Some of the names have changed, some of the lines have changed on this subway map, but there's still Adobe, Microsoft, Salesforce, to a lesser extent, SAP. You have some sort of legacy vendors like Aprimo, Acoustic, OpenText kind of hanging around here. So, there's still players that argue, that they can cross any number of these lines, or in other words, they can provide you solutions across all of these different landscapes. And so there has always been that tension, not just in that this map is really just reflective of in the marketplace between suite vendors. They call themselves cloud vendors, but they're really suite vendors versus more best of breed players. We have tended to find that organizations who build their stacks in a more best of breed approach tend to find better outcomes. But beyond that, we're not going to make any judgments here, just to say that this is a core tension and you need to be able to orient yourselves around that tension and make good decisions for yourself. Having said that, we have had and continue to have concerns about organizations that, rather than kind of compose their stacks, try to go all in, thinking that it will simplify their life with like a Salesforce, an Adobe, an SAP, or an Oracle. And the issue there is that, first of all, none of these vendors can really satisfy your entire stack. So you're going to be composing a stack anyway. So the only question is, how composable is it? But I think the other thing that we have found among including the largest council members that we work with, MarTech leaders, is that these vendors can be very difficult to navigate. Their products can go in different directions, typically the highest TCO, very often developer intensive. And what surprises people also is just the volume of technical debt. So it doesn't mean you should avoid the likes of Salesforce, SAP, Adobe, and Oracle. I think you might value them as potential anchor tenants. So for example, Adobe has probably the most sophisticated web content management platform and the most sophisticated web analytics platform on the market. If that's where you're at in terms of needing that degree of complexity, then maybe those are good solutions for you. But Adobe also has arguably the worst ESP on the market. In other words, the worst email marketing platform. That it's one of those rare cases we would tell you no one in their right mind should ever license that platform. So if you go with all Adobe, you're going to have to accept the good and the bad here, and we would never want you to have to settle for anything that's not just a poor fit, but literally a substandard platform. And we are seeing definitely, as these stacks diversify and mature, and as we get into more foundation services, I'll talk about in a minute, definitely opportunities to replace with simpler solutions, particularly at the edge. So we definitely encourage you, don't default to a lateral solution from an existing vendor. And in this regard, we understand that we're giving you completely opposite directions that we know Gartner and Forrester are giving you, which is that you should align around a single vendor. They're arguing that your life will be simpler and easier, and we believe that based on concrete experience, actually talking to people about their stacks, compiling the stacks of some of the largest companies in the world and putting them together into a chart, that's just simply not true. So, your individual technology platforms can be omni-channel, but your stack is really where you want to look at dealing with omni-channel. I'll talk about that in a minute here as we look at the latest stack model. So we've been working through this composable stack model for several years now. This is the latest 2023 iteration where you have engagement channels, interaction and delivery environments underneath that. Engagement services, where most of us spent the 2010s really beefing up, including vendors around CRM, Salesforce automation, outbound marketing, web content management, e-commerce, so on and so forth. The real innovation here, and where a lot of the action is here now, is in enterprise foundation services that are decoupled from specific engagement services and therefore can provide capabilities regardless of channel. We think really this is where a lot of the future weight is going to be in your stack. It's already happening, certainly in the middle column here around customer data, but also content and information over on the left and decisioning services over on the right. So if we take our subway map and we kind of turn it on its side and say, okay, what does this mean with respect to you? We end up really with a composable stack model. And of course, what you get with a subscription to us is that we take this model, which is a generic reference model, and shape it to your world, work with you to turn this into an artifact that you can then move forward with respect to what kind of a roadmap do you want for your stack. So by the way, this is the B2C version. You can contact us at the end if you're interested in getting the B2B version of this stack. So that then brings us to AI and ML. Is this really a stack busting technology as some expect? I'll give you a preview right away and say, no, it's not a stack buster, but we do have to account for where does AI and ML actually take place in your stack. And the reality is that vendors are injecting it into all of those boxes. We'll argue that what you should do is look at it as a layer and again as an enterprise foundation service. So this is a new, if you look at this pink row here, just below enterprise foundation services, this is really where we see AI in the stack. And it really drops into three different categories: generative, insights, and predictive AI. And in many cases, in fact, in most cases, these are going to be three different products. Now, we've been going through a really interesting exercise with our MarTech Council. So these are some of the biggest companies in the world. We bring their MarTech leaders together, no vendors, just all end users. And we recently asked them, hey, what are you doing with AI and ML for marketing and customer engagement and digital experience more generally? What are you doing? And if you're not doing it, what are you thinking about? We got a fascinating list back, great conversation around it. I can't share the details because it's all private. It all stays within the group. But a number of interesting things came out of that. One is there's a lot of concern about the different capabilities that are just getting injected willy-nilly and not wanting to pay OpenAI 3 different invoices for, have it in 3 different modules and pay 3 different times, but also wondering about the provenance of some of these tools and really wanting to get a handle on it from just a responsibility standpoint. But also that many of their use cases blend predictive, generative, and insights AI. So that was really interesting because that's actually turns out to be a somewhat complex thing to do because you're working across products. It reminds me a little bit of the early days of personalization where we're trying to blend content, data, and decisioning, and you have to kind of bring it all together. I think AI is going to be very similar. It's already emerging that way. The third thing that came away from it is that this is not fully transformational in the way that it's going to be holistically disruptive across. No one's firing anybody. This is becoming a very important tool set that is enhancing their effectiveness and their efficiency. It's going to be an important inflection point in MarTech, the same way that database marketing was an inflection point, the web was an inflection point, cloud was an inflection point, social was an inflection point. Now AI is an inflection point. So you have to pay attention to it. We're paying a lot of attention to it right now, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's unlikely going to completely transform MarTech into something different. So you can either take comfort or not with that. I believe the investor class is already there as well. But there's a lot of interesting things that organizations are doing with it. And then the fourth thing they asked us is, hey, we don't really know much about these vendors. We don't really know much about the tools that we're actually using on our behalf. Can you, RSG, do your typical magic here and help us explain? And so that's what we're going to be doing. We're releasing the new AI for marketing stream. It's going to be ready at the end of October. And as usual, we're going to be breaking it down into scenarios or business use cases. Those scenarios are going to fall into those 3 categories: generative, predictive, and insights. Based on input from enterprises like you who are on our council, we expect that at least initially, probably we're going to have 6 different generative use cases, 4 for predictive and 1 or 2 for insights. Each one of these scenarios will then use to evaluate the vendor. So again, this is a key differentiator from Real Story Group, is that we evaluate vendors against business scenarios, not necessarily feature lists. So we're super excited about this. We're going to start out with 24 vendors. Many of these are platforms that may be OEM'd into another vendor, so you still kind of want to know about them. And we expect that at the end of October. If you'd like to get some early information about that, be sure to contact Scott on this call, and he can put you on the list to let you know when that research will be out. But we're super excited about it. As usual, there's a lot of hype. We'll be working through that hype and giving you the real story, as we always do, on what's working and what's not working, what does a vendor really do, what does a vendor really not want to do very well. And I think we'll see the same situation where there are going to be some major players who you recognize, and then a number of other more disruptive point solutions that may be more useful for you. Okay, of course, there's all sorts of interesting things happening all across the map. I'm going to take 3 or 4 different marketplaces here and talk a little bit about what's going on and maybe how the map has shifted some over the last year and what we see going forward just before we wrap up here. So web content management, we're seeing a lot of what we call compression towards the middle. So the bottom end of the market is kind of fallen out towards site builders like Squarespace. At the top end of the market, we used to have 3 or 4 vendors under toolkits, and now it's just Adobe. So that's very interesting. What's happened is, if you look, SDL Tridian has been acquired multiple times. Now it's in the gray legacy box in the corner, the lower left. Sitecore we've now has gone down market a little bit by simplifying their platform with the advent of XM Cloud and deprecating the Sitecore XP platform. And so Adobe kind of stands alone in the toolkit category. And again, this is on a complexity spectrum. We're not making value judgments. So you would argue that Adobe probably has the most richness, the most extensibility, but it's also going to be the most complex, the most developer intensive, and that should scare you right away. And for sure, the longest, by far, the greatest long-term TCO, by far. So maybe that means it's a good fit for you, maybe it doesn't. But the point here is that there's an enormous amount of competition in this marketplace, a lot of really good solutions to pick from, although each with their own quirks, each with their own kind of vendor profile. Across both the mid-range platforms and what we describe as the complex platforms. The legacy platforms are solutions that you leave rather than license afresh. But a lot of really interesting things happening across these vendors, a lot of competition among the complex platforms. It seems to be kind of a happy space in the market, where a number of organizations that are either defecting from toolkits or that are moving up from the mid-range are there, but also the mid-range platforms continue to grow and expand, and in many cases become more capable. We're going to be adding a couple more vendors this year. And so, this is a very mature marketplace, and mature marketplaces tend to break out on a complexity spectrum. Here again, I'll pick a little bit on Forrester, who just within this month came out with their latest Forrester, I think they called it the DX wave, and there were only 12 vendors on it, and OpenText was there, which isn't really a nominal player in this space anymore. So there were key players, including several in the complex platforms, that were left out. And so this remains a highly fragmented, highly diverse marketplace with some very viable players who have been around for more than a decade or so. And so that is actually good news for you, and you need to be careful about the blind spots of traditional analyst firms. And also, I have to say, the blind spots of some of the consultancies that you work with that necessarily have to specialize in only 2 or 3 of these tools, and unfortunately very often have commercial relationships involved. So if you're going to own your own stack, then you need to own the decisions around which tools you're going to use. You may have an implementation firm or an integrator help you implement, that's one thing, but you need to own the decisions, including which tools that you're going to bring into your stack. So once again, I wanted to remind you that you can add any kind of question, anything you agree with, anything you disagree with, any anecdote you'd like to share in the questions panel in the GoToWebinar control panel. So there's a questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to chime in at any time. For sure, we'll have time to address your questions at the end. One thing before departing this slide, I'd mentioned I don't have a slide here for the digital asset management marketplace, but I think you're seeing the same kind of complexity sort of play itself out. Where's the complexity spectrum from vendors that we would argue can do DAM 3.0 to DAM 2.0 to DAM 1.0. Still a place for DAM 1.0 vendors, maybe not for everybody, but the DAM 3.0 really becoming more omni-channel content platform. So again, a similar kind of dynamic where it's as the digital asset management marketplace or DAM marketplace has matured, it's sort of fallen out into a kind of a complexity spectrum. And then your challenge is really to figure out where do you reside on that complexity spectrum. Once again, though, just want to advise you that you face a greater risk of overbuying than underbuying any of these technologies. That has always been the case in MarTech. It's still very much true in 2023, where we find that organizations that overbuy tend to become prohibitively slowed down, and that's usually much worse than underbuying, where you may miss out on some opportunities. Haven't talked much about outbound marketing in the last 5 years, but the marketplace continues to chug along. It's really interesting. As you know, it divides into two categories. So you have more B2C oriented email service providers, and then you have more B2B oriented so-called marketing automation platforms. They're different in several respects, but one thing that they share is their principal goal here is outbound marketing. So it's email, SMS, maybe WhatsApp, maybe direct mail. The point is that rather than inbound experience management, they're trying to reach out and touch someone, typically in the context of some sort of campaign or another. And so really interesting stuff happening here, and it's been happening slowly over the years, and you almost might not have missed it, but we think it's a time of transition and modernization. One of the things that's been interesting for us over the past couple of years is the number of replacements that we've advised on. So this is a time of replacement that's going on, and it has to do with the extraordinary technical debt across this particular market. I would say that the technical debt in this market is higher than in any other market that we cover, especially among the major players. And there are some logos on this chart actually that we're probably going to be dropping this year as we add some new ones, simply because while it may be fine to stay with them for now, it's really pointless actually licensing them afresh, and you really probably ought to be thinking about transitioning off them. So, I would put in that category, certainly Acoustic, probably Pardot, certainly Celligent, and some others. So, on the other hand, there have been some newcomers. Iterables and Braze have been around for a while. Klaviyo just went public. We're adding them to the stream in the next month. Klaviyo is a very specific sort of player. They have a very specific orientation, so you have to be a little careful about that, but they are a legit email service provider. So, so a lot of replacement going on. And then I think the bigger thing that's happening on the B2B side is organizations are questioning, like, do I really need a holistic marketing automation platform if I already have a more composable stack? In other words, does Marketo have too many different services, or Act-On, or for that matter, HubSpot, too many different services in a single platform that I'd actually like to break out and separate for a variety of good architectural and fit reasons? And so the marketing automation platforms historically tried to be kind of a B2B stack in the box, and in addition to being just outbound marketing platforms. And I think the world is beginning to look at that and saying, okay, that works maybe on the lower end of the market for small and mid-sized businesses, but I think a lot of questions about that at the higher end of the market. Then, of course, everybody's favorite market, customer data platforms. And this market is really beginning to sort of emerge out of the mists. And we've been following this very, very closely. And those of you who have licensed this research have seen us evolve this, adding new vendors, dropping a couple of vendors out of the picture. And when we started this, we just had one box, and we broke it into two, then we broke it into three, and now we've got 5 categories. Of course, you should be careful about categories that analyst firms give you. We like to put things in boxes because that helps us understand the world, and hopefully helps you understand the world. In the real world, boxes are a little bit more permeable than this, and I think that's particularly the case with the customer data platform marketplace, where you know, you could argue that maybe one would bleed into the other and so on and so forth. But let's just take a look at these categories, even while admitting that they're imperfect. And so first, let's look at you know, the horizontal thing that's going on here, that you have suites at the bottom. So these are CDPs that were typically belatedly adopted or developed or purchased by a major MarTech suite vendor. And all these suite vendors were nominally opposed to the idea of CDPs. They really wanted you to manage your data at the edge, which is exactly where you don't want to manage it. And they would have to give up some data management capabilities, but they've all come around to it. And the fact that they're kind of Johnny come lately, and that they've done it grudgingly, and that they want to keep you in their ecosystem, I think has caused prohibitive problems, we would argue, for almost all of these platforms. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't take a look at their CDPs, but it does mean that you need to apply an extra degree of due diligence. And it's not surprising that these vendors tend to not want you to test them. So what does that tell you? They want you to sort of license it as part of a bigger deal, as opposed to actually doing it head to head, because I can tell you that when we've seen these vendors have to compete, the major MarTech vendors have to compete head to head, they typically lose. So the action is really among the independents. And here we break up, again, you'll see a kind of a y-axis here, where we divide the processing-oriented independents from the activation and decisioning-oriented independence. And so this really has to do with the scope of platform. Are you trying to manage and operationalize and unify and derive attributes from raw data, or are you assuming that you have somewhere else quite legitimately in your infrastructure that's already doing that work, and so you want nice process, clean data, and have it just be sort of forward facing? And so there's a lot more to say that. Again, we've created this as kind of a bifurcation. There's a lot more devils in the details here, I would say, but it is a critical distinction. You know, we've been working with some enterprises that either intentionally or unintentionally ended up with both, one on each side of the line here, and just got off the call earlier today with a large global enterprise that's trying to sort that out, and we're helping them do that. So a lot to say about customer data platforms. We're beginning to see replacements as well. And we're also seeing some new entrants, particularly on the B2B side. So I think you'll see this logo chart changing and the map changing over the coming year. So that was a quick roundup of the latest map. Wanted to just let you know that there's 3 different ways that you can work with us. One is we'll help you find the best fit vendor, and so you can subscribe to any one of these subway lines here, and we'll give you access to some decisioning tools like Real Quadrant, where you input your own requirements and then it generates a annotated shortlist for you. So a very powerful way of getting to a decision quickly. The second one is what we call a full stack subscription, where we help you subscribe to all of our research, and we work with you to really optimize your stack on an ongoing basis. And then thirdly, like I said, we have this private confidential peer group that meets twice a year in person, 3 or 4 times a year virtually. These are all MarTech leaders like you. They're only at end user enterprises though, and we have private confidential discussions where we share a number of lessons learned, really an extraordinary group. They're also our sounding board on new research. So with that, once again, I'll invite you to see what other questions or comments you have. And while those are coming in and I prep an answer for them, Scott, you want to just talk about next steps and staying in touch?
Absolutely, yes. You're welcome to reach out to us anytime, explore@realstorygroup.com, and we can share more details about the research. And then to dovetail on what Tony was saying about that leadership council, we meet 4 or 5 times per year, including our next meeting, which is going to be in person down in the DC area in late October. So happy to walk you through the details of that if you're interested in participating in that really extraordinary group of MarTech stack decision makers and marketing operations leaders. In terms of webinars, our next one is going to be on September 20th. If you're thinking about the DAM marketplace, we'll be having one about using design thinking to select your next DAM. So you're welcome to join us for that. And you can always take a look at some of our recorded webinars that are on our website as well. And it does look like a couple questions have come in, but if any others have questions they'd like to ask, please feel free to enter those into the questions tab.
Yeah, so first one is from David. Selfish question, why isn't Alterian included in Journey Orchestration Engine? So, you know, the who's included and who's not, we don't pretend that these are like, you know, the Scott Brinker MarTech chart where every potential vendor is on it. These are just the ones that that we get inquiries on from our customer base, which, to be sure, our subscriber base tends to skew towards larger enterprises. And so the ones that they're interested in are the ones that we cover, David. Lee has a question. Any thoughts on where the privacy stack fits into the stack? So, yeah, I mean, privacy really, I would say, falls under the customer data operations. So that was the middle box under the data silo in the middle of our reference model, where we have customer data activation, customer data management and operations, and customer data insights. So privacy really has to be part of your customer data management regime. And that's why typically, not always, but typically privacy is a function that lives outside of your CDP. It's really more of an ecosystem layer type thing. So you're right that privacy itself can also be a stack of tools, but privacy as a function really resides within the customer data management box. Scott, I thought I saw one question earlier that disappeared. I wasn't sure whether the person deleted it or not, but in the meantime, from Jolene, any thoughts on Microsoft and why it's has only a small presence on your map? Well, that's a great question. You know, Microsoft has kind of covered marketing somewhat grudgingly over the years. I mean, they do have, you know, some outbound marketing capabilities. They do have a CDP. This is all tied up really with their dynamic CRM platform. So they kind of worked CRM outward or CRM outward with respect to email marketing and CRM backwards into a CDP, which would connect up the marketing and the CRM platform. And it's really just kind of limited to the Dynamics ecosystem. Of course, it's a different story when you get into AI, where Microsoft has a lot of different capabilities. But I think Microsoft has wanted more to partner with the likes of Adobe and Salesforce and others, even IBM, rather than challenge them heads on, particularly at the enterprise tier. Vicky's asking, what are your thoughts on bespoke commerce platform builds, e.g. PHP? So let's talk about this generally, bespoke builds, Vicky, across any of these. And so there is a time and a place, particularly if you want to just prototype something, or if your needs are literally so bespoke that there's no package solution that's going to get you. Even an open source framework isn't going to get you there. We find that less and less the case, unless you're in the software development business, you typically don't want to be building many of these tools. Remember that these are highly fragmented markets. You can find lower end platforms that are easy on your budget. You can find more developer oriented platforms that you can highly customize. You can find toolkits that you can turn into pretty much whatever you need. So, you know, I have seen companies successfully build e-commerce and other capabilities, including CDPs. So I wouldn't never completely 100% rule it out, because I've seen organizations be successful with it. The thing is that they're successful on day one, they're kind of successful on day 365. You know, by day 730 and by day, you know, 1100, very often they're running into problems because they're needing to innovate, they're needing to enhance, they're needing to fix bugs, they're needing to address technical debt. And if you're not really a software development, then you know, this isn't necessarily the best use of your resources. Not really a question. WCM, I saw Episerver. I think you mean Optimizely. Yes, that's correct. Optimizely, is the actual brand name. Episerver is the WCM product. So thank you, Pia, for pointing that out. And I'm glad that you love the Metro map. Hopefully it resembles a little bit the lovely Metro in Paris and certainly other French cities. Don is saying, I challenged Forcer to combine content collaboration DAM into one software vendor solution. I was wondering about your thoughts were. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about that. I think when you talk about content collaboration, we think of content operations, and there are content operations hubs. Certainly when Sitecore acquired Content Hub, that was one of the things that they wanted to do, was turn it into a content collaboration and content marketing hub. I do think that they are two distinct but related capabilities, so I'm not going to ding Forrester on that. David, good to see you. Curious to see ESCO Media Beacon on the great map of the world. We hear this damn product is being sunsetted. What is our view? So yeah, really interesting. You know, we actually have a couple of sunsetted products on here, whether they're in name or de facto sunsetted. I would encourage you to come to the DEM webinar in a couple of weeks, where your friend Jared will be and my friend Jared will be talking a lot more about these topics, including ESCO.
Tony, we did have one other one come in that earlier, which was, can you elaborate on why you mentioned Adobe as the worst email marketing tool? Is it cost or complexity based?
Well, I think that, you know, they made an acquisition of a French vendor, Unveiling, which was, again, at kind of the top of the market. So Adobe likes to buy very sophisticated tools. And I think that there were problems from the very beginning, and I think Adobe just mismanaged the whole thing. And so I think that there were tensions between those two, and Adobe just let campaign, acquire a prohibitive amount of technical debt. Then they tried to create a new version of it, and that didn't go well. And it just was really a product management disaster with respect to Adobe. And I would never suggest that anybody license it afresh. Cool. Well, thanks for sticking extra. It's always a pleasure to be with you. So excited that you share in this enthusiasm, in this visualization. If you have any thoughts for improvement, or you want to learn more about our AI, please do contact my colleague Scott on the call here. So for Scott and I, this is Tony Byrne signing out for Real Story Group. See you next time. Bye now.